There's something haunting about the way the wind moves across an empty landscape, how it curls around forgotten stones, hums through abandoned doorways, and carries echoes of lives long gone. But what if those very winds, the ones that seem to erase history, are actually preserving it? Today, we're diving into one of archaeology's most astonishing breakthroughs, the rediscovery of 30 lost settlements, not through traditional digging or high-tech imaging, but by deciphering the secrets hidden in ancient wind patterns. Picture this: centuries ago, a thriving village stood where now there's only dust. Over time, the people vanished, the buildings crumbled, and the land seemed to forget. But the wind never did. It carried traces of their existence, scattering subtle clues in the way it shaped the earth, the way it left behind patterns only the most patient observers could decode. This isn't just about maps or ruins. It's about listening to the Earth's quietest storyteller. Wind pattern analysis, a method blending climatology and archaeology, has uncovered settlements so well hidden they'd been erased from memory entirely. Think of it like reading fingerprints left by time itself. By studying how winds sculpted dunes, shifted soil, or even influenced the placement of long-gone structures, researchers have pieced together entire communities lost to history. These aren't just dots on a map. They're windows into how people lived, adapted, and ultimately disappeared, leaving behind stories written in the very air we breathe. What makes these discoveries so extraordinary is how they challenge everything we thought we knew about uncovering the past. We're used to imagining archaeologists with brushes and trowels, carefully unearthing artifacts. But here, the tools are weather models, historical climate data, and an understanding of how wind interacts with the land over centuries. The result: a tapestry of human history rewoven from the threads of nature's own records. From remote deserts to overgrown jungles, these 30 settlements are proof that sometimes the past isn't buried, it's carried on the breeze, waiting for someone to listen. So settle in, because this journey isn't just about lost places. It's about rediscovering the invisible forces that shape our world and the astonishing ways they've kept the past alive. The secret lies in the way wind interacts with human structures long after they're gone. When a settlement vanishes, its footprint lingers in the land, subtle depressions where walls once stood, patches of soil compacted by centuries of foot traffic, even the way certain plants grow differently over buried foundations. Wind, acting like a sculptor over generations, exaggerates these clues. It piles sand against long collapsed barriers, carves channels where pathways used to be, and deposits fine layers of dust in patterns that mirror the layout of forgotten streets. Researchers like Dr. Elena Petrov realized these weren't random acts of nature. They were echoes of human habitation, preserved in the Earth's slow dance with the atmosphere. Take the deserts of Central Asia, where entire cities once thrived along the Silk Road. At first glance, the landscape appears barren, just endless dunes and cracked earth. But by mapping wind-driven sediment shifts, scientists detected unnatural ridges too symmetrical to be natural, that traced the outlines of massive fortresses swallowed by time. In other cases, the absence of erosion told its own story. Wind scours softer soil first, leaving harder packed ground exposed. When researchers spotted oddly resistant patches in the middle of windswept plains, they knew they'd found the compacted floors of ancient homes, hardened by centuries of daily life. What makes this method revolutionary is its precision. Traditional archaeology often relies on guesswork, digging where records suggest something might be buried. But wind patterns don't lie. They reveal not just where people lived, but how they shaped their environment. A settlement's layout alters local wind currents for centuries, leaving behind a fingerprint as unique as our architectural blueprint. Dr. Petrov's team proved this by reconstructing a lost Mongolian trading post solely from the way modern winds still curve around its invisible walls. The data matched historical accounts down to the placement of stables and market stalls, no shovel required. And it's not just arid regions where this technique shines. Coastal sites, buried under layers of sand driven by sea winds, have given up their secrets too. In Scotland, researchers studying dune formations stumbled upon the outline of a Viking-era fishing village no one knew existed. The wind had shifted the shoreline over time, but the original settlement's impact on sediment layers was still legible, like a message pressed into wet clay and left to dry. This isn't just about finding ruins, it's about rewriting history without disturbing a single grain of soil. Every scrape of a trowel risks damaging fragile evidence, but wind analysis lets us study the past by reading what the elements have already uncovered. As one researcher put it, we're not discovering these places for the first time. The wind knew where they were all along. We're just learning how to listen. Wind doesn't just uncover history, it preserves it with an almost artistic precision. While water can flood and erode, while human hands might loot or rebuild, wind works differently. It's a patient archivist, carefully lifting away layers of time without obliterating what lies beneath. Take the Sahara, where scorching gusts have sculpted the dunes for millennia. There, researchers discovered something extraordinary. A 5,000-year-old trading post, its walls and artifacts nearly untouched, because the very sands that buried it also shielded it. Like a natural vault, the dunes kept the structure safe from the elements, from scavengers, even from the passage of time itself. This phenomenon isn't unique to deserts. Along coastlines, wind-driven sand has sealed entire villages in a protective embrace. In Namibia, a centuries-old shipwreck emerged from the dunes almost perfectly preserved, its wooden hull intact, its cargo still stacked as if waiting for delivery. The same forces that buried it had also guarded it from rot and decay. It's as if the wind knew these places were meant to be found, not lost. What makes wind such a remarkable preservationist is its selectivity. Unlike floods or earthquakes which scatter and destroy, wind follows patterns. It deposits sand in predictable ways, creating stable layers that act like insulation. In Mongolia, herdsmen long spoke of ghost cities that appeared after particularly fierce storms. Structures revealed when the wind stripped away just enough soil to expose them, then stopped short of tearing them apart. Modern research confirmed these stories. The same winds that uncovered the ruins had also kept them hidden for generations, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. The implications are staggering. While traditional excavations often race against decay, fighting moisture, looters, or erosion, wind-preserved sites offer snapshots frozen in time. A marketplace in the Sahara still held baskets of grain, their contents dry and intact. A coastal settlement in Arabia revealed footprints in hardened sand, capturing a single moment when someone walked home thousands of years ago. These aren't just artifacts, they're moments preserved so completely, it feels like stepping through a doorway into the past, and that's the true magic of wind as a keeper of history. It doesn't just show us where people lived, it shows us how. The way a doorway faced away from prevailing winds tells us they understood their climate. The alignment of streets reveals how they harnessed breezes for cooling. Even the wear patterns on walls, smoothed by centuries of gentle abrasion, speak to daily life in ways no artifact alone ever could. The wind didn't just save these places, it recorded their stories in the very shape of the land. So the next time you feel a breeze, remember, it might be carrying more than just air. It could be whispering secrets from a world long gone, waiting for someone to listen. For centuries, the lost oasis of Zerzura existed only in whispers, a mirage-like paradise said to bloom with palm trees and springs deep in the Libyan desert. Travelers' tales described its towers gleaming white under the sun, a refuge for weary caravans crossing the sands. But as years passed, Zerzura faded into myth, dismissed as just another desert fable. That is, until the wind began to tell its story. Climatologists studying ancient dune formations noticed something peculiar: long, winding depressions in the earth, too uniform to be natural. These weren't random scars left by storms, they were the ghosts of riverbeds etched into the landscape by water that vanished millennia ago. Even more telling was the way modern winds had sculpted the surrounding dunes, piling sand in precise ridges that mirrored the outlines of human-made structures. Satellite images revealed a startling truth. Beneath those shifting sands lay the faint but unmistakable grid of streets and buildings. When archaeologists arrived, they didn't need to dig deep to find proof. The wind had already done the work, exposing pottery shards and fragments of grinding stones right on the surface, artifacts carried upward by centuries of swirling gusts. Further investigation uncovered stone foundations, their corners aligned to shield against prevailing winds, just as desert builders had done for generations. Here was Zazura, not as a shimmering dream, but as a real, thriving hub where traders once rested and bartered goods under the shade of date palms. The discovery shattered assumptions about trans-Saharan trade routes. Historians had believed this region was too hostile for large-scale travel, but Zerzura's location, revealed by those telltale wind patterns, proved it was a crucial waypoint. The oasis sat at the convergence of two ancient paths, its wells refilled by seasonal rains long forgotten. Merchants didn't avoid this stretch of desert. They depended on it, leaving behind traces in the very way the wind sorted the soil. What's extraordinary is how little physical excavation was needed to confirm all this. Traditional archaeology might have spent years digging blindly, but wind analysis pinpointed the site with uncanny accuracy. By reading the dunes like a map, researchers could predict where to find Zerzura's central plaza, its granaries, even the remnants of its gardens, all because the wind had preserved the memory of human activity in the land itself. This isn't just about solving a desert riddle. It's about realizing how much history is written in landscapes we thought were empty. Zerzura's story didn't vanish. It was etched into the earth, waiting for those who knew how to read the wind's quiet language. And if one lost oasis could rewrite our understanding of trade and survival in the harshest environments, imagine what else might still be hidden, not under our feet but carried on the air. In the heart of India's Thar desert, where the horizon shimmers with heat and the sands seem endless, the wind has been quietly at work, not burying history but revealing it. For generations, local herders spoke of strange shapes emerging from the dunes after particularly fierce storms, fleeting glimpses of carved stone too precise to be nature's handiwork. But it wasn't until researchers began studying the desert's wind patterns that the truth came into focus. Those fleeting shapes weren't illusions. They were the fingertips of a lost civilization reaching through time. The key lay in the way the Thar's relentless winds had scoured the landscape. Over centuries, they'd peeled back layers of sand like pages in a book, exposing intricate carvings of deities, fragments of temple walls, and even the outlines of stepped wells. But here's what astonished archaeologists: the wind hadn't just uncovered these ruins randomly. It had followed the very paths laid out by the ancient builders themselves. The temples and courtyards were designed to channel breezes for cooling, creating microcurrents that 800 years later still guided how the sand eroded away. The wind wasn't destroying the site, it was retracing its blueprint. Local legends had long hinted at a great pilgrimage site swallowed by the desert, but details had faded into myth. No one expected to find it so intact or so vast. By mapping the way sand accumulated around certain rock formations, researchers pieced together a sprawling complex of temples, guest houses, and bathing pools, all aligned to celestial events and seasonal wind shifts. The carvings told stories of monsoon prayers, their subjects often depicted with arms raised as if beckoning the rains, and in a twist that stunned historians, the wind's erosion patterns revealed something even texts hadn't recorded: hidden chambers beneath the main temples, their entrances perfectly sealed by drifting sand until the right gusts uncovered them. What makes Thar's temples so remarkable is how they rewrite our understanding of desert civilizations. This wasn't just a cluster of buildings, it was a carefully engineered refuge, designed to harness the wind for ventilation, water collection, even spiritual symbolism. The main shrine's pillars were spaced at intervals that matched the desert's dominant wind frequency, creating a haunting hum during storms, like a chant rising from the earth. Modern acoustic analysis confirmed it. The temple literally sang with the wind, a feature likely woven into rituals lost to time. And perhaps most poignant of all were the footprints. In one sheltered courtyard, the wind had exposed a layer of hardened clay crisscrossed with barefoot impressions, hundreds of them, all facing the same direction. Pilgrims frozen mid-step, their journey preserved not by intention, but by the very forces that once threatened to erase them. Today, those footprints lead us not just to a forgotten temple, but to a profound truth: sometimes the past isn't lost. It's just waiting for the wind to blow the right way. High on the sun-baked cliffs of Mesa Verde, where the wind whistles through canyons like a voice from the past, researchers made a discovery that rewrote the story of the ancestral Pueblons. For decades, archaeologists believed they'd mapped every dwelling in the area until wind erosion patterns revealed entire neighborhoods hidden in plain sight. The key: dust. Over 700 years, fine particles carried by relentless canyon winds had settled into every crack and crevice, slowly filling in the outlines of structures carved directly into the rock. What looked like natural shadows on cliff faces were actually the ghosts of homes, storage rooms, and ceremonial spaces, their shapes emerging only when scientists began tracking how the wind had sculpted the landscape over centuries. The breakthrough came when climatologists noticed something odd about the way dust accumulated in certain areas. While most of the mesa's cliffs showed even weathering, some surfaces had bizarre, geometric patterns of erosion, straight lines where dust piled unnaturally deep, or sudden dips in the rock that matched the dimensions of known Pueblon doorways. Using aerial wind current maps, researchers realized these weren't random formations. They were echoes of human engineering. The ancestral Pueblons had positioned their cliff dwellings to harness natural wind patterns for ventilation and temperature control, creating microcurrents that, centuries later, still guided how dust settled. Those very airflow blueprints became the map to finding lost structures. One such discovery was a sprawling apartment complex tucked behind a seemingly solid rock face. Wind models showed air rushing through invisible gaps in the cliff, depositing dust in perfect rectangles that matched the footprint of multi-story buildings. When researchers scanned the area, they uncovered an entire honeycomb of rooms, their ceilings blackened by ancient cook fires, their walls still bearing fingerprints pressed into the clay plaster. But the real surprise was the sophistication of their design. These weren't just shelters, they were climate-controlled marvels. The dwellings faced southeast to catch morning sun while avoiding harsh afternoon heat, and their ventilation shafts aligned precisely with seasonal wind directions, pulling cool air through living spaces in summer and blocking icy drafts in winter. Perhaps most astonishing was what the wind revealed about daily life. In one hidden chamber, scientists found corn cobs perfectly preserved in a pocket of still air sealed by the same dust that had hidden the room for centuries. In another, the erosion patterns exposed a network of tiny holes in the floor. At first, they seemed like damage until researchers realized these were part of an ingenious cooling system. Air flowing up from the canyon below would pass through the holes, creating a natural breeze across sleeping areas. Even their trash told a story. Wind had piled sand against certain cliff faces in layered stripes, each band marking decades of discarded pottery shards and tools, creating a timeline of technological change visible in the cross-section of dust. This isn't just about finding new ruins, it's about understanding how intimately these ancient builders knew their environment. They didn't fight the wind, they collaborated with it, designing homes that worked with natural forces rather than against them. Today, as modern architects study these wind-responsive designs for sustainable building inspiration, we're reminded that the past isn't just a collection of artifacts. It's a conversation with the elements, written in the very air that still moves through these silent stone rooms. And sometimes, all it takes to hear that conversation is listening to where the dust settles. For 2,000 years, the city of Heracleion slept beneath the Mediterranean, its grand temples and bustling harbor swallowed by the sea in one catastrophic event. Legends spoke of its splendor, a gateway between Egypt and the Greek world where Cleopatra herself once walked. Yet for centuries, its exact location remained a mystery, lost somewhere off Egypt's coast. That is, until the wind began to whisper its coordinates. The breakthrough came when oceanographers noticed something peculiar about the seabed's shifting sands. Strong seasonal winds, funneled by the Nile Delta's geography, were carving underwater channels in precise, unnatural patterns. These weren't random currents, they were following the ghostly contours of ancient breakwaters and submerged streets. Like a compass pointing to history, the wind-driven currents had been systematically uncovering artifacts. A colossal statue of the god Happy here, a cluster of gold coins there, all emerging from the sediment in alignment with the same invisible grid. Divers initially assumed these were scattered finds, but wind pattern analysis told a different story. By mapping how sediments migrated with the currents, researchers realized the artifacts weren't randomly dispersed. They clustered along what could only be man-made pathways, their distribution mirroring the way wind would have once swept through the city's original thoroughfares. Even underwater, Heracleon's urban design was directing the elements. The wind's modern counterpart, the sea current, was retracing the city's blueprint, revealing everything from shattered amphorae to intact ceremonial barges. What stunned archaeologists most was the preservation. While time and water had worn away much of the city's wood and paint, the wind-driven sediment had acted like a protective blanket. Delicate artifacts, papyrus scrolls sealed in wax-woven baskets, even wooden votive offerings, survived in stunning detail, encased in layers of fine silt deposited by centuries of carefully orchestrated currents. The very force that hid Heracleion had also safeguarded its treasures, and then there were the statues. Towering figures of pharaohs and gods stood eerily upright on the seafloor, as if frozen mid-stride. At first, their positioning seemed chaotic, but wind current models revealed the truth. These monuments had fallen precisely where the ancient city's plazas once stood, their bases embedded in stone slabs that the wind's underwater equivalent, the current, had slowly exhumed. The statues weren't toppled randomly, they were signposts marking the heart of Heracleon's religious district. This discovery rewrote the playbook for marine archaeology. Instead of relying solely on sonar or dredging, teams began using historical wind data to predict where currents might uncover new sites. Off the coast of Alexandria, the same methods located a sunken palace complex, its layout discernible from the way modern tides flowed around its still-buried walls. Heracleon's story reminds us that wind doesn't stop at the shoreline. Its influence stretches beyond dunes and deserts, shaping even the ocean's memory of us. And sometimes, to find what's lost beneath the waves, all we need to do is follow the breeze. Deep in the Kizilkum Desert of Uzbekistan, where the wind sculpts dunes into waves of gold, a single gust in 2014 exposed the corner of a weathered brick wall. At first glance, it might have seemed like just another rock formation, but the pattern was too perfect, the angles too sharp. This was no accident of nature. It was the edge of a caravanserai, one of the great way stations of the ancient Silk Road, swallowed by time and sand. What made this discovery extraordinary wasn't just the structure itself, but how it was found. For decades, historians knew this stretch of desert had been a crucial artery for traders moving between China and the Mediterranean. Texts mentioned a caravanserai called the Lion's Rest, where merchants watered their camels and shared news under the stars. Yet its location had vanished from memory, leaving a gap in the Silk Road story. Traditional excavations failed to find it until researchers realized the wind had been mapping the site all along. The key lay in the dunes layers. Like tree rings, each band of sediment told a story. By analyzing how wind had deposited sand over centuries, scientists spotted anomalies, areas where the layers thinned abruptly, as if brushing against something solid beneath. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed their hunch. Those irregularities traced the outline of massive walls, a central courtyard, and even the troughs where camels once drank. The wind hadn't buried the caravanserai randomly. It had sealed it like a time capsule, preserving its layout with startling clarity. Inside those walls, the past came alive. The courtyard's compacted soil revealed grooves from countless cartwheels, while the stables still held fragments of hemp rope and camel dung, desiccated but intact. Most telling was the positioning of the building itself. The caravanserai sat at a precise angle to the prevailing winds, its entrance shielded by a curved wall, a design that funneled cool air inward during scorching summers while blocking sandstorms. This wasn't just a stopover, it was a masterpiece of desert engineering tailored to the rhythm of the wind. But the real revelation was how the site reconnected lost dots. Artifacts found here, Persian coins, Chinese porcelain shards, even a scrap of Byzantine silk, proved this wasn't some remote outpost. It was a cultural crossroads where goods and ideas flowed as freely as the ever-shifting sands. Historians had long assumed this stretch of the Silk Road was sparsely traveled due to the harsh terrain. The caravanserai's location, revealed by the wind's persistence, proved the opposite. Traders braved this route because places like the Lion's Rest made it possible. Perhaps the most poignant discovery was a single child's footprint preserved in clay near the well. In that moment, the caravanserai stopped being just a ruin. It became a snapshot of life of a merchant's daughter stretching her legs after weeks on the road, her small heel pressed into wet earth just before the wind swept in to dry it forever. That's the magic of this method. It doesn't just show us where history happened. It shows us how it felt to be there, breathing the same air, sheltered by the same walls, waiting for the next breeze to carry you forward. The howling Arctic winds of Greenland don't just bring cold, they carry memories. For centuries, they scoured the remains of a Viking outpost near the island's icy eastern coast. burying it under layers of snow so dense the settlement vanished from history. That is, until researchers noticed something peculiar about the way those same winds stacked the snowdrifts. The patterns weren't random, they were a blueprint. This was no ordinary lost village. It was a Norse settlement from the height of the Viking Age, a cluster of sturdy turf houses where families once huddled around fires, telling sagas as the polar night stretched on. Historians knew the Greenland colonies had been abandoned during the Little Ice Age, but the details were fuzzy. Did everyone leave at once? Did they starve? The Winds Archive held answers. By mapping how snow accumulated around subtle ridges in the landscape, scientists pinpointed the outlines of longhouses, their walls still partially intact beneath the frost. The key was in the drift's wind tends to pile snow against obstacles, creating telltale mounds that linger for centuries. What looked like natural hills were actually roofs frozen in time. Inside those buried homes, the past was astonishingly preserved. The wind-packed snow had acted like a natural freezer, sealing away fragments of daily life. A wooden spindle still wound with wool, a rusted iron knife beside a hearth, even the imprints of children's boots in the earthen floors. But the most revealing discovery wasn't an artifact, it was the layers themselves. The snowdrifts told a story of gradual abandonment, not sudden catastrophe. Some houses showed signs of repair, their walls patched with fresh turf just before being left. Others held stockpiles of dried fish, carefully stored but never eaten. The wind hadn't just preserved the settlement, it had recorded its final chapter, whispering clues about a community adapting and ultimately yielding to a changing climate. What makes this site extraordinary is how it rewrites the narrative of the Norse in Greenland. Popular lore paints their disappearance as a failure, a people defeated by the cold. But the wind's evidence suggests a different tale. These were skilled survivors who modified their architecture to trap insulating snow against walls, who hunted seals when farmland froze, who clung to the edge of the world for generations. Their outpost didn't vanish because they gave up, it faded because the wind itself shifted, carrying storms that no amount of ingenuity could withstand. Today, as Greenland's modern ice sheet retreats, the wind is uncovering more than just Viking ruins. It's revealing a parable about resilience and the delicate balance between human ambition and the forces of nature. The same gusts that once buried these homes are now exhuming them, as if to remind us that even the mightiest civilizations leave only traces, waiting for the right moment to surface. In the vast, sun-baked lake beds of western New South Wales, the wind tells an ancient story, one of ingenuity written in stone. For generations, the local Aboriginal people spoke of their ancestors' clever fish traps, but the full scale of these structures remained hidden until drought and wind conspired to reveal them. As seasonal lakes dried up, relentless gusts scoured away layers of silt, exposing intricate networks of curved stone walls arranged in perfect geometric patterns. These weren't random rock piles, they were the remnants of one of the world's oldest known aquaculture systems, a sophisticated technology that sustained communities for over 9,000 years. What makes these traps extraordinary is how seamlessly they marry human design with natural forces. Each curve and channel was meticulously placed to harness wind-driven water currents. During wet seasons, breezes pushed fish toward the stone funnels, where retreating waters would strand them in shallow holding pools, a self-sustaining harvest system requiring no permanent human supervision. Elders from the Ungjemba and Pocantee nations recognized the patterns immediately, recalling oral histories that described maintaining these traps across generations. The wind's erosion had uncovered not just stones, but a living memory encoded in both land and culture. Modern researchers were stunned by the trap's precision. Using wind tunnel simulations based on historical climate data, hydrologists demonstrated how the walls amplified natural airflow to direct water movement. Some channels aligned perfectly with seasonal wind shifts, creating currents that herded fish like invisible shepherds. Others featured clever gaps that allowed juvenile fish to escape, evidence of sustainable practices millennia before the concept entered Western science. The entire system functioned like a finely tuned instrument, playing the wind itself as part of its mechanism. But the real revelation came when archaeologists mapped the site's full extent. What initially appeared as scattered stone lines resolved into a vast interconnected network spanning nearly 20 miles, with different trap designs tailored to specific fish species and water conditions. Some walls stood barely shin-high, designed to work with subtle breezes in calm backwaters. Others rose like crescent moons to withstand the churning currents of wind-whipped main channels. This wasn't just fishing, it was landscape-scale engineering, a testament to deep ecological understanding passed down through countless generations. Perhaps most moving was how the wind's rediscovery bridged ancient and modern knowledge. When elders walked the exposed lakebed with researchers, they pointed out features no textbook could explain: how certain rocks bore polish from generations of hands adjusting their positions, or how trap designs shifted near ceremonial sites to honor the fish's spiritual significance. The wind hadn't just uncovered stones, it had revealed a dialogue between people and place, written in the language of currents and seasons. Today, as these traps gain recognition among scientists, they stand as a powerful reminder. Sometimes the oldest technologies are the most advanced, and the quietest forces like the wind can shout the loudest truths. On the windswept shores of Scotland's Orkney Islands, where the North Sea's gusts carved dunes into ever-changing shapes, something extraordinary emerged from the sand, a village so ancient, its builders had vanished millennia before the pyramids rose. For centuries, locals knew this stretch of coastline as a place where storms occasionally exposed strange, rounded mounds, but no one guessed these were the roofs of an entire Neolithic settlement, older than Stonehenge itself. Then one brutal winter, gales tore away layers of coastal sediment like pages ripped from a history book, revealing the unmistakable outlines of stone houses huddled together against time. This was no ordinary archaeological site. The village, now called Skara Bree, wasn't just preserved, it was practically frozen in time. The same winds that had buried it under sand for 5,000 years had also sealed it in a protective cocoon, leaving beds, dressers, and even stone hearths intact. Walking through the exposed homes felt less like visiting ruins and more like stepping into a lived-in space where the inhabitants had just stepped out. A stone shelf still held a cache of finely crafted bone needles. A recess in one wall cradled a pile of polished gaming dice made from whale vertebrae. Most haunting of all were the doorways, their lintels carved low, not for some ancient superstition, but because the builders had designed them to deflect the very winds that would one day uncover them. What stunned researchers most was the village sophistication. These weren't crude huts, but engineered homes with built-in drainage, insulated walls, and even a primitive form of central heating. The layout revealed a community that understood its environment intimately. Houses were positioned in a crescent to share warmth and block prevailing winds, while midden heaps piles of discarded shells and bones were strategically placed to act as windbreaks. Even the tools told a story of adaptation. Fishhooks and harpoons found on-site showed these people didn't just endure the harsh coastal climate, they thrived in it, harvesting riches from both sea and land. But the real revelation came when archaeologists studied how the wind had shaped the site's rediscovery. Skara Bree hadn't been uncovered randomly. Centuries of shifting sands had followed the original contours of the village. piling highest against the sturdiest walls while gradually scouring away softer deposits around them. The wind wasn't destroying the past, it was curating it, exposing structures in the exact order that told their story. First came the outlines of homes, then the artifacts inside, and finally, the surrounding fields where evidence of early barley cultivation emerged from the dunes. Like a patient archivist, the wind had preserved the most durable elements first, ensuring they'd survive until modern eyes could see them. Perhaps most poignant was what the village design said about its end. The final layer of sand contained no signs of panic or disaster, just orderly homes with tools neatly stowed, as if waiting for owners who never returned. Climate data from the period suggests the wind patterns shifted subtly around 3000 BC, bringing fiercer storms that may have made coastal living unsustainable. But even in retreat, these Neolithic builders left clues in the land itself. The same winds that eventually buried Skara Brae also carried seeds inland, where pollen records show barley cultivation continued. They didn't vanish, they adapted, leaving behind stone whispers of their ingenuity for the wind to share when the time was right. Today, as rising sea levels threaten to reclaim the site, modern conservators face an ironic challenge, using artificial barriers to protect the village from the very forces that preserved it. There's a lesson in that paradox. Sometimes the elements that seem to erase history are the ones keeping its secrets safe. Skara Brae reminds us that the past isn't always buried deep. Sometimes it's just waiting for the wind to change direction. The rolling fields of Yorkshire hold a secret beneath their windswept surface, a ghost village frozen in time, its story etched into the very soil. Warham Percy, once a thriving medieval community, now lies as a series of eerie humps and depressions in the landscape, visible only from certain angles when the low sun casts long shadows across the earth. For centuries, locals assumed these were just natural undulations, until the wind began stripping away topsoil to reveal something far more poignant: the precise outlines of peasant cottages, manor houses, and even the crumbling walls of a Norman church, all arranged around a village green that hasn't seen laughter in over 500 years. What makes Warham Percy exceptional isn't just its preservation, it's how the wind sculpted the land to tell its final chapter. Unlike sites buried by sudden disasters, this village faded gradually, its abandonment written in layers. As the last families left, the wind carried fine grains of soil into empty doorways, filling homes at a pace that preserved their shapes like plaster casts. In the churchyard, the same winds exposed something chilling: mass graves where victims of the Black Death were laid to rest, their positions marked by subtle dips in the earth where coffins collapsed. Soil analysis revealed even darker details: traces of charcoal from homes burned during the Great Famine, when desperate villagers torched their lord's grain stores in rebellion. But the real revelation came when researchers mapped how wind erosion varied across the site. The manor house foundations showed deeper scour marks than peasant huts, evidence that the wealthy abandoned Warham Percy first, leaving the poor to weather worsening conditions. The wind had sorted the village's history like pages in a book, with each layer telling a different part of the story. In one cottage's footprint, perfectly preserved ridges showed where a loom once stood, its weight compacting the earth enough to resist centuries of erosion. Nearby, the outline of a bread oven emerged, its circular form still holding fragments of charred grain, likely someone's last meal before leaving forever. Perhaps most moving is what the wind didn't erase. Footpaths between houses remain visible as slightly depressed lines, their surfaces hardened by generations of feet. These weren't just routes, they were social arteries connecting neighbors who shared everything from harvests to heartbreaks. When archaeologists studied pollen samples preserved in wind-blown sediment, they found traces of medieval wildflowers that once lined these paths, planted not for food but for beauty. Even in hardship, these people made space for grace. Today, standing in Warham Percy's empty fields, you can almost hear the wind whisper its warnings. The same forces that preserved this village also document its collapse not from war or catastrophe, but from a slow unraveling of the threads that bind communities together. As climate shifts brought colder, windier years, crops failed more often. When plague came, there were too few left to tend the fields. The wind's patient work reminds us that civilizations don't always fall with a bang. Sometimes they simply fade away, leaving behind shapes in the earth that only the persistent breeze can translate. In those hollows and ridges, we see our own fragility written plain, and the enduring truth that no society, no matter how rooted, is permanent against the changing air. High on the Bandiagara escarpment in Mali, where the wind races through narrow canyons like a river of air, the cliffs hold secrets built to last. For generations, Dogon elders spoke of their ancestors' hidden granaries, storage chambers carved high into the sandstone, safe from both floods and thieves. But few outsiders believed these stories until the wind itself began pointing the way. Researchers studying erosion patterns noticed something peculiar. Certain cliff faces showed unnatural hollows, their openings aligned precisely against prevailing winds. These weren't random caves, they were ancient silos, their strategic placement revealing a lost chapter of West African ingenuity. The granary's design was nothing short of brilliant. Perched hundreds of feet above the valley floor, they exploited the escarpment's unique wind currents. Dry harmattan gusts, blowing steadily from the northeast, swept through ventilation shafts carved into the rock, creating a natural cooling system that prevented mold and pests. The same winds that threatened to dehydrate crops below actually preserved them in these elevated vaults, but the real stroke of genius was concealment. From the ground, the granaries blended seamlessly into the cliff face, their entrances angled to avoid casting shadows, their surfaces colored with local clay to mimic natural stone. Only when the wind shifted direction at certain times of year did the openings become visible, their dark mouths suddenly apparent against the sunlit rock. What emerged from these wind-revealed chambers rewrote assumptions about pre-colonial Africa. Archaeologists expected to find modest grain stores, perhaps enough for a single village. Instead, they uncovered a vast network capable of feeding thousands. Some silos held not just millet and sorghum, but exotic spices and dried fruits traded across the Sahara, proof of a sophisticated distribution system. Even more telling were the markings inside. Symbols carved into walls recorded harvest amounts, while notches tracked loans between communities. This wasn't just survival, it was a formalized economy, one that flourished long before European contact. The wind's role in their discovery feels almost poetic. Centuries ago, these granaries were opened or sealed based on seasonal wind patterns closed against humid monsoon breezes, open to dry winter air. Now, those same rhythms have exposed them to modern eyes. In one chamber, researchers found baskets of grain still intact, their contents preserved so perfectly they could identify the exact year of harvest from growth rings in the stalks. Another held clay tablets detailing a famine relief system, where surplus from good years was stored to offset bad ones. Perhaps most striking is what these granaries say about foresight. While medieval Europe lost entire populations to crop failures, West African societies engineered resilience into the landscape itself. The cliffside silos weren't just storage, they were a centuries-long conversation with the wind, a partnership between human need and natural forces. Today, as climate change threatens global food security, that ancient wisdom feels more relevant than ever. The Dogon didn't just hide their harvests in these cliffs. They embedded their survival in the very air that now, at last, is telling their story. The legend of Babylon's Hanging Gardens has captivated historians for centuries, a wonder of the ancient world said to have bloomed in the heart of the desert, its terraced greenery dripping with vines and exotic flowers. But when researchers began studying wind patterns across Iraq's ancient settlements, they uncovered a twist in the tale. The gardens might never have hung in Babylon at all. Instead, the clues pointed to a forgotten city 30 miles to the north, where the wind had been quietly preserving evidence of something extraordinary. It started with an anomaly in the dust. Soil samples from the ruins of Nineveh, once the grand capital of the Assyrian Empire, contained unexpected layers of fine silt too evenly distributed to be natural. These weren't just desert deposits, they were the ghostly remains of an elaborate irrigation system, carried and sorted by centuries of seasonal winds. By mapping how particulates accumulated around the site, hydrologists reconstructed a network of canals and aqueducts far more advanced than anything in Babylon. Even more telling was the mineral composition. The silt held traces of gypsum and bitumen, materials the Assyrians used to waterproof their gardens, exactly as described in cuneiform tablets found nearby. The wind hadn't just preserved the infrastructure, it had preserved the blueprint. What emerged was a revelation. The famed Hanging Gardens might actually have been the work of King Sennacherib, not Nebuchadnezzar. Assyrian inscriptions boasted of his palace without rival, with terraced orchards watered by screw pumps lifting Euphrates water to dizzying heights. Wind erosion patterns on surviving walls even revealed the shadowy outlines of what could have been rooftop gardens, their roots fed by capillary action through layered stone. This wasn't just horticulture, it was hydraulic engineering on a scale that dwarfed Babylon's capabilities. The implications rippled through academia. Herodotus, the Greek historian whose account shaped Western understanding of the gardens, had likely conflated two cities. Wind analysis suggested why seasonal dust storms from Nineveh's direction often deposited sediment over Babylon, blending their stories in the historical record. Even the garden's famous hanging description might have been a translation error. The Akkadian word could also mean overhanging, fitting Nineveh's terrace design perfectly. Perhaps most poetic is how the wind corrected the record. As researchers studied satellite images, they noticed vegetation patterns around Nineveh still followed the outline of ancient garden walls, their growth nourished by minerals left behind in the soil. The gardens never truly vanished, they just went quiet, waiting for the right breeze to whisper their real location. Now, as scholars revisit Assyrian texts with fresh eyes, one thing becomes clear: sometimes history isn't lost. It's just been blowing in the wrong direction. The scorching winds of Jordan's Wadi Fanan have been whispering secrets for millennia, secrets about kings, empires, and fortunes forged in fire. For years, scholars debated whether King Solomon's legendary mines were myth or reality, their existence buried somewhere between scripture and speculation. Then the desert winds began to uncover the truth, grain by grain. Across this stark landscape, gusts etched away at the earth, exposing not just crumbling furnace walls and slag heaps, but something far more valuable: copper-rich dust trails that stretched like ancient highways toward distant trading hubs. These weren't random deposits, they were the fingerprints of an industrial empire, one that matched biblical descriptions of Solomon's wealth down to the last detail. What makes this discovery extraordinary is how the wind preserved the evidence. Over centuries, it carried minute particles of copper ore and smelting byproducts far from their source, depositing them in telltale layers across the region. By analyzing these dust trails, their composition, their spread, even their depth, researchers could trace the ore back to specific mining sites in Wadi Fainan. The data painted a vivid picture: vast copper production on an industrial scale during the exact era when Solomon's reign reached its zenith. But the real breakthrough came when they matched these findings to biblical accounts. 1 Kings describes Solomon's craftsmen working with bronze as plentiful as stones, his fleets trading copper alongside gold and spices. The Wind's archive confirmed it. This was no exaggeration. The scale of production here could have supplied entire civilizations. The mines themselves were feats of engineering. Wind erosion exposed ventilation shafts cleverly angled to harness desert breezes, funneling air into underground galleries to keep miners cool. Smelting furnaces stood aligned to prevailing winds, their chimneys designed to create natural drafts hot enough to separate pure copper from ore. Even the waste told a story. Layers of slag, the rocky leftovers from smelting, showed consistent patterns of dispersal, carried by wind to dumping sites far from work areas. This wasn't haphazard labor, it was a systematic operation, one that ran for centuries and left behind enough copper to line Solomon's temple walls as described in Chronicles. Perhaps most fascinating is how the Wind solved a scriptural puzzle. For years, historians questioned how Solomon could have controlled such distant mines. The answer lay in the dust. Traces of Fainan's copper turned up in artifacts from Jerusalem to Egypt, their chemical signatures proving they traveled along trade routes mentioned in the Bible. The Wind hadn't just preserved the mines, it had mapped their economic reach, showing how Solomon's wealth flowed across the ancient world. Today, standing in Wadi Fainan, you can still see the Wind's handiwork. It scours the ground around half-buried crucibles, revealing their blackened interiors where molten copper once bubbled. It whispers through collapsed mine shafts, carrying echoes of the thousands who labored here: slaves, artisans, merchants, all part of a supply chain that shaped kingdoms. The real treasure wasn't just the copper, it was the proof that sometimes the Wind doesn't erase history. It writes it in dust, waiting for the right moment to let it blow free. For centuries, the marshes of Spain's Guadalquivir River held a legend, a city so rich. Its rulers dined on silver tables beneath towers of gold, only to vanish beneath the waves in a single night. Tartesos was considered little more than a fairy tale, a local spin on the Atlantis myth. Then the Wind began to peel back the layers of history, revealing a truth far more fascinating than fiction. Along the river's shifting dunes, where the Atlantic gusts carve and reshape the land, storms started exposing strange objects: bronze anchors crusted with age, shards of pottery etched with an unknown script, and most telling of all, the unmistakable curve of a ship's hull emerging from the sand. This wasn't just debris, it was the signature of a civilization swallowed by time. What makes Tartesos extraordinary isn't just its sudden reappearance, it's how perfectly the Wind preserved its story. Unlike cities buried by earthquakes or floods, Tartesos succumbed gradually to the river's shifting course, its abandonment written in the dunes' rhythmic layers. As trade routes changed and the harbor silted up, winds piled sand over abandoned streets, sealing them like a time capsule. The same forces that hid the city also protected it, leaving behind a snapshot of Bronze Age commerce frozen mid-transaction. In one exposed warehouse, archaeologists found stacks of tin ingots, precisely the material Mediterranean traders craved for making bronze. Nearby, the Wind uncovered stone weights still grouped by value, as if merchants had stepped away momentarily and never returned. But the real revelation came when researchers mapped how artifacts were distributed. The Wind hadn't scattered them randomly. Bronze tools clustered where workshops once stood, while delicate glass beads gathered in what must have been a marketplace, sheltered from erosion by the remnants of a collapsed roof. Even the city's layout became clear from the way dunes dipped and rose. Main avenues followed the path of ancient winds, designed to funnel cooling breezes through the bustling port. This wasn't just a settlement, it was a carefully engineered hub where sailors, miners, and artisans thrived centuries before Rome's rise. Perhaps most compelling is how the wind settled a historical debate. Greek historians like Herodotus described Tartessos as a wealthy kingdom trading in precious metals, but skeptics dismissed these accounts as exaggeration. Then the dunes gave up their proof. Goldsmiths' molds still flecked with residue, slag heaps from silver refining, even a ceremonial dagger with a hilt of electrum, a natural gold-silver alloy local to the region. The wind didn't just uncover a city, it vindicated ancient texts proving Tartessos was the New York or Shanghai of its day, a glittering crossroads where cultures converged. Now, as climate change accelerates erosion along the Guadalquivir, the wind is revealing Tartessos at a dizzying pace. Each storm peels back another layer, exposing everything from Phoenician glass to Egyptian scarabs artifacts that trace a trade network spanning the ancient world. But there's poetry in the way these treasures emerge. The same winds that once filled Tartessos' sails with trade winds now uncover its legacy, grain by grain. It's a reminder that history isn't always lost. Sometimes it's just waiting for the air to shift. Deep in the Brazilian Amazon, where the canopy stretches unbroken for miles and the air hums with life, the wind has been quietly rewriting history. For years, scientists assumed this was pristine wilderness untouched by large-scale human civilization before European contact. Then satellite imagery revealed something astonishing. Beneath the dense foliage, the Earth bore the scars of massive geometric shapes, perfect circles, squares, and lines stretching hundreds of feet across. These weren't natural formations, they were geoglyphs, earthworks carved by an ancient society so sophisticated, they'd engineered the very forest itself. And the key to their discovery, the wind's relentless dance with the treetops. Here's how it unfolded. Researchers studying microclimate patterns noticed something peculiar about certain areas of the jungle. Where these geometric shapes lay hidden, the wind moved differently. Trees grew slightly shorter, their canopies less dense, as if the soil beneath resisted their roots. When scientists mapped these anomalies, they uncovered over 400 earthworks, ditches, and mounds arranged with mathematical precision. The wind had subtly altered the forest's growth above them, creating a fingerprint visible only from above. This wasn't just a handful of isolated structures, it was evidence of a sprawling network of settlements connected by roads and ceremonial centers, all swallowed by time. The scale of these earthworks shatters old assumptions about the Amazon. These weren't primitive tribes living in harmony with untouched nature, they were landscape architects on a grand scale. The geoglyphs served multiple purposes. Some were ceremonial, aligned with solstices and celestial events. Others functioned as water reservoirs or defensive fortifications. Most remarkably, the wind's erosion patterns revealed something even more profound. The so-called virgin rainforest was actually a carefully managed garden. Soil samples showed traces of terra preta fertile, human-made soil enriched with charcoal and organic waste. This wasn't wilderness, it was a breadbasket cultivated over centuries to support a population that may have rivaled ancient Egypt's. What's truly mesmerizing is how the wind preserved this story. In other environments, rain and floods would have erased these earthworks entirely. But here, the jungle's protective canopy, shaped by the same wind currents that revealed the sites, shielded them from erosion. The very forces that hid the geoglyphs also preserved them like a living archive. When archaeologists finally reached the sites, they found pottery shards, charcoal from ancient fires, even seeds from long domesticated crops. The wind hadn't just exposed ruins, it had unveiled a way of life, one that thrived by bending the forest to its will. Now, as climate change alters wind patterns across the Amazon, even more geoglyphs are emerging. Each discovery paints a clearer picture of a society that saw the jungle not as an obstacle, but as a partner. Their earthworks channeled water during droughts, their gardens mimicked natural ecosystems, and their roads followed the paths of prevailing winds for easier travel. In an era obsessed with conquering nature, these ancient builders achieved something we're only now beginning to understand: a civilization that didn't just live in the Amazon, it became part of it. And thanks to the wind, their legacy is finally stepping back into the light. Satellite images of the Sahara's endless dunes reveal what seems like emptiness, just waves of sand stretching toward the horizon. But when researchers began studying how the wind sculpted those dunes over centuries, they spotted something extraordinary: faint, ghostly lines crisscrossing the desert like ancient highways. These were the remnants of camel caravan routes, erased from human memory but preserved in the desert's shifting sands. The wind hadn't just buried these paths, it had recorded their every curve and junction, waiting for someone to decipher its archive. What makes these ghost tracks so remarkable is how they rewrite our understanding of the Sahara. For generations, we imagined this sea of sand as an impenetrable barrier, isolating civilizations on either side. But the wind's erosion patterns tell a different story. By analyzing how sand accumulated around certain rock formations, researchers reconstructed a vast network of trade routes, some stretching over 800 miles, that once connected bustling oases and salt mines. The faint depressions left by countless camel caravans formed natural wind tunnels, guiding modern gusts along the same paths medieval traders took. Even after centuries, the desert remembered. The level of detail is astonishing. Wind-scoured grooves revealed where caravans stopped to rest, their campsites marked by circular depressions where tents once stood. In some places, the tracks suddenly widened, evidence of merchant groups merging before dangerous stretches. Elsewhere, the path zigzagged deliberately around dune fields, following the safest passage rather than the shortest line. This wasn't random wandering, it was a carefully mapped economy with rules etched into the landscape itself. But the real breakthrough came when researchers matched these wind-restored routes to historical accounts. Medieval Arab geographers wrote of cities like Mesa and Timbuktu thriving as trade hubs, but skeptics dismissed their descriptions as exaggeration. Now, the wind's data proved them right. Satellite thermal imaging, guided by wind erosion models, located the foundations of caravanserais exactly where the tracks converged, structures large enough to house hundreds of merchants and their camels. Even the goods they carried left traces. Wind-blown sand around these sites contained microscopic fragments of gold, salt, and ivory, the same commodities historical texts described flowing across the desert. Perhaps most moving is what these invisible paths say about human resilience. The caravans didn't just survive the Sahara, they mastered it. Their routes followed secret water sources known only to guides, passing wells now buried under dunes. Wind patterns even revealed how they navigated. Certain rock formations, aligned to catch the wind, produced haunting whistles that functioned as natural road signs in the featureless expanse. Today, as climate change expands the desert, these ghost tracks offer more than just history. They're a testament to ingenuity, proof that even the harshest environments can be woven into the fabric of civilization, if you know how to listen to the wind. In the rugged mountains of Uzbekistan, where the wind howls through narrow gorges like a scholar reciting forgotten verses, a chance discovery rewrote our understanding of Silk Road spirituality. For years, locals in the Fergana Valley spoke of caves that seemed to breathe gusts of air rushing from fissures in the cliffside, carrying with them flecks of something unusual. Then one summer, when drought left the land parched and brittle, a particularly fierce windstorm dislodged a slab of rock, exposing a hidden chamber stacked with bundles wrapped in crumbling cloth. This wasn't just any cave, it was a scriptorium, a sacred library painstakingly preserved by the very winds that threatened to destroy it. Inside, the air was thick with history. Shelves carved into the stone held hundreds of manuscript fragments, their edges frayed but their ink still startlingly black. These weren't mere documents, they were the spiritual heartbeat of a Buddhist monastery that thrived here when the Silk Road pulsed with traders and pilgrims. The wind had done something extraordinary. As it seeped through cracks over centuries, it deposited fine layers of dust that sealed the texts in a protective embrace. In some places, pages fused together like geological strata, creating a timeline of devotion written in silk and mulberry paper. What these fragments revealed was revolutionary. Previous knowledge of Central Asian Buddhism came mostly from Chinese pilgrims' accounts, but here were original teachings, prayers, medical treatises, even merchant ledgers noting donations to the monastery. One scrap contained a previously unknown parable about compassion, its words still legible where the wind's eddies had spared it from moisture. Another held meticulous star charts, proving monks tracked celestial movements to time their rituals. Most astonishing was a nearly intact scroll describing a festival of 1,000 lamps, where devotees lit butter lamps in wind-carved niches along the cliffs, their flickering lights visible for miles across the valley. But the real magic lay in how the wind curated this discovery. The manuscripts weren't randomly preserved. Texts stored in alcoves facing prevailing winds survived best, their fibers toughened by constant airflow. The monastery's architects had unknowingly collaborated with nature, positioning their library where the wind would act as both archivist and restorer. Even the fragments' dispersal told a story, certain philosophical texts clustered together, suggesting they'd been stored near a teaching hall, while medicinal recipes gathered near what must have been the infirmary. Now, as linguists piece together this literary puzzle, a profound truth emerges. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for spices and silk, it was a highway of ideas where winds carried not just dust and seeds but prayers and dreams. Those monks understood something we're only now rediscovering. That knowledge, like the wind itself, is both fragile and enduring. It can vanish in a gust or linger for centuries, waiting for the right moment to stir again. Beneath the rocky plains of Turkey's Cappadocia region, where the wind whistles through fairy chimneys and carved cliff faces, lies a mystery that defies imagination. Kuyu, an underground city so vast, its true scale eluded researchers for decades. For years, archaeologists believed this labyrinth of tunnels and chambers could shelter around 10,000 people during invasions or disasters. But the wind, that persistent archivist of human history, had other ideas. By studying how air currents moved through known passages, scientists detected something astonishing: subtle drafts seeping from what should have been solid rock. These weren't just cracks in the earth, they were the breath of a hidden world, exhaling secrets through the centuries. The breakthrough came when researchers noticed peculiar patterns in Durinkuyu's ventilation. Ancient engineers had designed the city with vertical air shafts to circulate fresh air, a marvel of pre-industrial technology. But certain areas showed wind behavior that didn't match the mapped layout, gusts pulling toward walls where no opening should exist. Thermal imaging confirmed their hunch. Behind those walls lay an entire undiscovered level, its existence preserved by the very drafts meant to keep the city alive. When crews carefully excavated, they uncovered a network of chambers large enough to double Durinkuyu's known capacity. Suddenly, a refuge for 10,000 became a metropolis for 20,000, complete with stables, wineries, and even a cruciform church carved into the living rock. What makes this discovery so extraordinary isn't just the scale, it's the sophistication of the design. The newly found level wasn't an afterthought, it was integral to the city's survival. Wind analysis revealed how its ventilation shafts interlocked with the upper levels like gears in a clock, creating a natural airflow system that could sustain families for months. The builders didn't just dig haphazardly, they harnessed geology itself, positioning chambers along natural fissures where the Earth's own breathing helped regulate temperature and humidity. Even the placement of communal kitchens made sense once researchers saw how cooking heat rose through strategically placed chimneys, drawing fresh air through living spaces below. But the real revelation was what this expansion said about ancient society. 20,000 people couldn't vanish underground without coordination. Grain stores in the new chambers held not just wheat, but saffron and other luxuries, proof this wasn't merely a panic room for peasants, but a planned community capable of preserving culture during crises. The wind's clues led to another shock. Hidden tunnels linking Derinkuyu to neighboring underground cities, suggesting a subterranean network spanning hundreds of miles. This wasn't just a city, it was a civilization beneath the soil, its existence written in the drafts that still whisper through its halls. Today, standing in those rediscovered chambers, you can feel the weight of history in every gust. The same air currents that once carried smoke from oil lamps and the murmurs of families in hiding now guide archaeologists to new finds. Derinkuyu's story reminds us that the past isn't always buried. Sometimes it's hovering in the air around us, waiting for the right moment to be heard. And as long as the wind keeps blowing, who knows what other secrets might surface. The howling winds of Antarctica don't just sculpt ice, they uncover stories. On the continent's remote shores, gusts sharper than any blade have polished glaciers into translucent windows, revealing something startling beneath. The soot-stained remains of iron blubber ovens, their brick foundations still standing a century and a half after whalers dragged them onto the ice. These aren't just relics, they're the frozen echoes of an industry that thrived in one of Earth's most unforgiving places, preserved not despite the wind, but because of it. What makes these whaling stations so remarkable is how perfectly the Antarctic climate captured their moment in time. Unlike ruins elsewhere worn by rain and heat, these structures were flash frozen in the act of being used. Rusted harpoons lean against walls as if just set down. Wooden barrels, warped but intact, still bear the stench of rendered oil. Even the footprints of workers remain pressed into patches of ash where the wind scoured away snow but left the ground beneath untouched. It's as if the crews stepped away mid-task, their temporary world suspended by the very storms that once threatened to bury it. The stations themselves were feats of brutal ingenuity. Whalers positioned ovens to harness katabatic winds, those relentless downhill gusts that scream off the ice sheets, using them to stoke fires hot enough to boil blubber into oil. They built walls from stacked whale vertebrae, knowing the wind would pack snow between the bones, creating insulation no timber could match. Even their trash became architecture. At one site, researchers found a walkway paved with thousands of clay pipe fragments, their curved surfaces laid like cobblestones to prevent slipping on ice. These weren't just survival tactics, they were acts of adaptation so precise, the wind immortalized them. But the real revelation came when scientists studied how the ice preserved these sites. Wind-polished surfaces exposed layers where soot abruptly stopped, marking the exact year whalers abandoned each station as whale populations crashed. In some places, the ice held pollen from ships' hay bales, proof they'd brought livestock for fresh milk. Elsewhere, faint grooves in the rock showed where crews dragged sledges loaded with barrels, their paths mirrored by modern wind channels that still follow those same routes. The stations didn't just exist in this landscape, they became part of its rhythm, their legacy etched into the wind's memory. Perhaps most haunting are the personal touches the cold preserved. A whaler's carved chess piece mid-game rests on a barrel top. Names scratched into beams remain crisp, their grooves unfilled by frost. At a station on Deception Island, the wind recently exposed a chalk tally board still marked with counts of barrels filled and whales taken. These weren't faceless industrial sites. They were outposts where men measured time in storms weathered and tons rendered, their lives reduced to numbers on a wall until the wind decided otherwise. Now, as climate change accelerates ice melt, these stations are emerging faster than archaeologists can document them. Each revelation adds nuance to a dark chapter of exploitation. Whale vertebrae show healed harpoon wounds, proving some animals escaped previous hunts only to be caught again. Infant whale bones found near ovens suggest desperate crews took calves when adults grew scarce. The wind didn't just preserve the whalers' story, it recorded the cost of their work, ensuring the ice would one day bear witness. Standing among these ruins today, you can almost hear the past in the gusts that whip between the ovens. The same winds that once carried the stench of boiling blubber now whisper tales of resilience and recklessness, of men who bent nature to their will until nature pushed back. These stations weren't meant to last, but the Antarctic wind had other plans, refusing to let their lessons dissolve into the sea like so much spilled oil. High on the sun-baked cliffs of Choco Canyon, where the wind has spent centuries scouring sandstone into swirling patterns, a secret lay hidden in plain sight. For generations, visitors marveled at the Pueblon ruins, the towering great houses, the intricate road systems, but few noticed the subtle markings etched into certain rock faces. Then, one dry summer, a particularly fierce windstorm stripped away layers of desert varnish, exposing a series of precise spirals and dagger-like carvings previously obscured by time. These weren't random graffiti. They were celestial maps painstakingly aligned to capture the sun's movement at key moments of the year, and they proved the ancestral Pueblons didn't just track the seasons, they orchestrated their entire civilization around them. What makes these petroglyphs extraordinary isn't just their precision, but how they integrate with the canyon's natural architecture. The newly revealed carvings don't stand alone, they form a network of solar markers spanning miles. At sunrise during winter solstice, sunlight pierces a narrow crack in Fajada Butte, casting a dagger of light that perfectly bisects one spiral. On equinoxes, shadows from nearby rock pillars align with carvings at Cosa Rinconada, the Great Kiva's geometry echoing the same celestial rhythms. Even more astonishing, wind erosion patterns show these markers weren't static. Over generations, the Pueblons adjusted them, compensating for subtle shifts in Earth's axial tilt, a level of astronomical sophistication no one thought possible without written records. The implications rewrite our understanding of Choco's purpose. This wasn't just a trade hub or ceremonial center. It was a massive astronomical observatory, its buildings positioned like gears in a celestial clock. Take Pueblo Bonito's famous North Wall, for example. Wind-scoured surfaces recently exposed faint notches that, when studied, align with lunar standstill events occurring every 18.6 years. These wouldn't just mark time, they'd predict it, allowing Choco's priests to schedule ceremonies years in advance. Nearby, a previously overlooked petroglyph, now known as the sun dagger, interacts with sunlight so precisely it creates a glowing zigzag down a cliff face exactly when the planting season begins, an agricultural alarm clock carved in stone. But the real revelation came when researchers mapped how wind erosion varied across the canyon's petroglyphs. The deepest carvings, those most resistant to weathering, formed a pattern. They clustered along corridors where the canyon's unique acoustics amplify sound, suggesting ceremonies may have synchronized with both light and sound cues. Imagine chanting rising as sunlight strikes a spiral, or flutes echoing as shadows touch a marker. This wasn't just science, it was multisensory ritual, blending astronomy, architecture, and music into a single experience. Perhaps most moving is what these discoveries say about the Pueblon's relationship with their environment. Unlike modern observatories that fight atmospheric distortion with domes and lenses, Chaco's astronomers worked with the land. They used the canyon's natural contours as a telescope, its rocks as calibrations. The wind, in exposing these carvings, didn't just reveal ancient knowledge, it highlighted a philosophy where humans weren't separate from nature, but active participants in its rhythms. Today, as modern astronomers grapple with light pollution and satellite interference, there's humility in realizing that 1,000 years ago, people were reading the cosmos with nothing but stone, shadow, and the patience to watch the wind uncover truth. Beneath the churning waves of the North Sea, where storms whip the water into froth and tides claw at the seabed, lies a lost world, one the wind refuses to let us forget. 8,000 years ago, this wasn't ocean at all, but a vast, fertile plain known as Doggerland, where forests swayed and rivers carved valleys into soft earth. Today, its only remnants are scattered tools and bones, artifacts that should have vanished beneath the waves forever except for one remarkable force. The same winds that drowned this landscape are now uncovering its secrets, guiding divers to hotspots where history sleeps beneath shifting sands. The breakthrough came when fishermen began hauling up strange objects in their nets, not shells or stones, but finely crafted flint blades and fragments of antler harpoons. At first, these finds seemed random until oceanographers noticed a pattern. The artifacts clustered where strong tidal currents, driven by prevailing winds, scoured the seabed in cyclical patterns. By mapping these underwater wind highways, researchers realized they weren't just looking at scattered debris, they were following ancient riverbanks and lake edges, places where Mesolithic hunters once gathered. The wind hadn't just preserved Doggerland's story, it had drawn them a map. Diving into these sites is like stepping into a ghostly reflection of prehistory. In one area, the currents exposed a submerged forest, its peat beds still holding footprints of aurochs and the charred remains of campfires. Nearby, a stone axe was found perched upright on a ledge, as if its owner had set it down moments before the waters rose. Most haunting are the human traces, a child's toy carved from amber, a needle made from bone, even a set of deer antlers deliberately wedged between rocks, perhaps as some long-forgotten ritual. These aren't just artifacts, they're fragments of daily life, suspended between memory and oblivion. What makes Doggerland unique is how perfectly the wind's mechanics align with its rediscovery. Unlike static ruins on land, these sites are constantly changing. Winter storms might bury a tool for decades, only for spring tides to whisk the sand away again. This dynamic preservation means every dive is a race against time and an opportunity. In 2019, a team following wind current models discovered an entire hunting camp, its wooden posts still standing in the seabed like skeletal fingers. The arrangement told a vivid story, circular huts facing away from prevailing winds, just as modern tents pitch against gusts. Even 8 millennia later, the wind's direction still mattered. Perhaps most astonishing is how these finds rewrite human history. Doggerland wasn't some peripheral wilderness, it was the heart of Europe, a crossroads where early humans exchanged ideas and materials. Flint from England's coasts turns up in German sites of the same era, while amber from Scandinavia appears in French caves. The wind's erosion patterns have exposed not just tools, but trade routes, proving these people were connected across vast distances long before roads or ships existed. Now, as climate change intensifies North Sea storms, the wind is accelerating its revelations. Each gale strips away another layer, offering glimpses of a world that vanished beneath rising seas, a cautionary tale written in sediment and stone. For the divers who brave these waters, the experience is uncanny. Descending into the gloom, they rely on the same currents that once carried canoes, letting the wind's modern echo guide them to places where the past feels achingly close. It's a reminder that landscapes may drown, but memory lingers, carried on currents older than civilization itself. The Gobi Desert doesn't surrender its secrets easily. For centuries, its shifting dunes and blistering winds concealed one of history's most astonishing nomadic feats until the very storms that buried the truth began to reveal it. Satellite images showed peculiar patterns in the vast emptiness, massive concentric circles etched into the earth, some spanning nearly half a mile across. At ground level, these formations were invisible, their outlines only emerging when dust storms scoured the landscape just right, exposing subtle ridges where thousands of hooves and feet once packed the soil into permanence. These weren't natural phenomena, they were the ghostly imprints of moving palaces, the seasonal capitals of Genghis Khan's empire, designed to rise and vanish with the rhythm of the steppe. What makes these circles so extraordinary is how they redefine our understanding of nomadic power. We often picture the Mongols as perpetual wanderers, their wealth carried on horseback. But the wind's erosion patterns tell a different story, one of temporary grandeur. Each ring corresponds to a specific function. The outer circle held rows of felt tents for guards and servants. The middle ring housed artisans and administrators, and the innermost space contained the Khan's own jur, a vast mobile palace draped in silks and furs. The precision of these layouts, preserved by wind-driven sediment, reveals an empire that balanced mobility with spectacle, capable of conjuring a city from nothing and dissolving it back into the dust when the seasons changed. The desert's winds acted like an archaeologist's brush, carefully exposing clues about daily life in these fleeting metropolises. In one circle, researchers found compacted trails leading to a central plaza, evidence of bustling markets where merchants from Baghdad to Beijing bartered under the Khan's protection. Another site showed wind-scoured depressions where livestock pens once stood, their positions calculated to shield animals from prevailing gusts. Most telling were the fragments of porcelain and jade uncovered where the wind stripped away topsoil, proving these weren't just military camps but cultural crossroads where looted treasures became diplomatic currency. But the real revelation came when scientists studied how the circles interacted with the Gobi's climate. These weren't randomly placed. Each site sat at a precise angle to seasonal winds, positioned so summer breezes cooled the tents while winter storms deposited snowdrifts against outer walls for insulation. The Mongols didn't fight the desert's brutality, they choreographed with it, turning the wind itself into an architectural tool. Even the timing of their movements followed atmospheric cues. Tree ring data shows the circles were occupied during unusually dry years, suggesting the Khan's court migrated not just for pasture, but to exploit wind patterns that kept rival armies disoriented in dust clouds while Mongol messengers rode clear skies. Perhaps most poetic is how the wind preserved the circle's demise. As the empire fragmented, fewer hooves trampled the seasonal sites into renewal. The very storms that once smoothed and maintained the outlines began erasing them, leaving only the deepest grooves like the final strokes of a vanishing painting. Yet in their fleeting existence, these circles held a lesson modern cities might envy. That permanence isn't about stone, but impact. The Mongols built their capitals to disappear, knowing true power lies not in monuments, but in the ability to reshape the world at will and leave the wind to whisper how it was done. Along the coast of Bahrain, where the Persian Gulf's winds whip salt spray into the air, the landscape holds a secret written in seashells, mountains of them. These aren't natural formations, but towering middens, some over 30 feet high, piled up over centuries by generations of pearl divers. For years, they were dismissed as simple trash heaps until researchers noticed something extraordinary. The way the wind had sculpted them wasn't random. It had sorted and layered the shells with such precision. It revealed a timeline of one of history's most astonishing underwater economies. Each gust that scours these mounds uncovers more than just oyster shells. Hidden between the layers are tools, stone weights used to sink divers faster, bone nose clips to protect against salt water, even fragments of woven baskets for hauling treasures to the surface. The wind's erosion acts like an archaeologist's trowel, exposing not just what these people harvested, but how they lived. The deepest layers, packed with smaller, harder-to-open shells, tell of early divers taking whatever the sea offered. Higher up, the shells grow larger and more uniform, proof of specialized techniques passed down through generations. And near the top, impeccably sorted pearl shells, all nearly identical in size, evidence of a trade so refined it demanded perfection. What's staggering is the scale. These mounds stretch for miles, containing millions of shells. To amass such quantities, divers would have plunged up to 100 feet on a single breath, braving sharks, jellyfish, and the bends, all for pearls that adorned royalty from Mesopotamia to Rome. Though wind's preservation is so meticulous, researchers found shells still bearing knife marks from where divers pried them open, their edges sharp as the day they were struck. Even more telling are the gaps in the layers, years when the piles grew abruptly thinner, coinciding with historical records of storms or plagues that temporarily stilled the industry. But the real revelation came when scientists matched wind erosion patterns to trade routes. The same gusts that exposed these mounds also carried pearls across deserts on the backs of camels. Chemical analysis revealed Bahraini pearls in the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs and the crown jewels of Persian shahs. This wasn't just a local trade, it was the oil industry of its day, fueling empires with iridescent luxury. The wind's archive even hints at darker chapters. Layers mixed with infant bones suggest diving was a family affair, with children trained to hold their breath before they could swim. Now, as modern storms accelerate erosion, the mounds are yielding their final secrets. Recently, wind-scoured patches exposed a diver's burial, his skeleton still curled in the fetal position, ears deformed by years of pressure. Beside him lay his tools and a single, perfect pearl placed in his palm, perhaps by a grieving crewmate. In that moment, these wind-blown heaps stop being just relics. They become memorials to lives spent chasing beauty beneath the waves, their stories waiting centuries for the right gust to set them free. Deep inside France's Lascaux cave, where the air has hung still for millennia, the faintest breath of movement changed everything. For decades after its discovery in 1940, the cave's walls dazzled researchers with their vibrant animal paintings stampeding horses, towering bulls, creatures so alive they seemed to breathe in the flicker of lamplight. But the true scale of this Ice Age masterpiece remained hidden until a team noticed something strange. Drafts, tiny, almost imperceptible currents of air seeping through what appeared to be solid rock. Where most saw a dead end, the wind saw a doorway. Following those whispers of movement led to one of archaeology's most electrifying moments. Using smoke to trace the draft's paths, explorers discovered narrow fissures that widened into entirely unknown chambers, their walls covered in artworks twice as old as the pyramids. The new galleries didn't just add to Lascaux's collection, they transformed its story. Where the main cave featured bold, communal imagery, these hidden spaces held intimate sketches, a solitary deer drawn in charcoal, its delicate strokes preserved in the still air, handprints smaller than a child's, pressed beside a wolf's outline as if in collaboration. The wind hadn't just revealed more art, it had revealed a private studio, a place where artists experimented beyond the ceremonial displays. What makes this discovery revolutionary is how it reshapes our understanding of Paleolithic creativity. Previously, experts assumed cave art was primarily ritualistic, created for group ceremonies, but the new chambers suggest a more nuanced reality. In one recess, researchers found pigments stored in hollowed-out stalagmites, their colors still vibrant. Nearby, the cave floor bore grooves where artists had ground minerals, and even what appeared to be a primitive easel, a flat rock positioned to catch flickering firelight just right. This wasn't just sacred decoration, it was a workshop, a place where technique was honed in solitude before being shared with the community. The wind's role in this revelation feels almost poetic. Ice Age artists relied on natural ventilation to clear smoke from their torches, choosing chambers where drafts would carry away fumes without disturbing delicate pigments. Now, those same airflow patterns guided modern scientists to their secrets. In the deepest chamber, the air currents had preserved something extraordinary: footprints. Not the broad strides of adults, but the tentative steps of a teenager, preserved in soft clay alongside smudged sketches of a bison's leg, a novice's practice piece frozen in time. The wind didn't just lead us to art, it led us to the artists themselves, their struggles and triumphs etched as clearly as the ochre on the walls. Perhaps most astonishing is what the drafts tell us about Lascaux's preservation. The newly found chambers weren't sealed by chance, their entrances were deliberately positioned in the path of subtle air currents that maintained perfect humidity, preventing mold from devouring the pigments. Even the choice of colors reflected environmental wisdom. Reds and yellows made from iron oxide dominate the draftier areas where moisture might fade softer hues, while blacks derived from manganese and more resistant to humidity appear in damper recesses. These artists weren't just decorating caves, they were engineering time capsules, collaborating with the wind to ensure their work would outlast empires. Now, as climate change alters the cave's delicate balance, the wind's whispers have taken on new urgency. Conservationists monitor drafts like vital signs, knowing a shift in airflow could mean the difference between preservation and decay. But in those hidden chambers, the legacy remains untouched, a testament to the first masters who understood that art isn't just what you create, but where and how, and with whom you invite the elements to collaborate. The wind showed us their world, now it's our turn to listen. Off the coast of Nagasaki, the abandoned island of Hashima rises from the sea like a crumbling concrete battleship, its skeletal high-rises standing sentinel over empty corridors. For decades, this ghostly place, nicknamed Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island, was frozen in time, its streets silent since the last coal miner departed in 1974. Then the typhoons came. The same fierce winds that once howled through the mineshafts began peeling away layers of grime and rust, exposing something extraordinary. The island wasn't just a ruin, it was a perfectly preserved snapshot of industrial life, its layout etched into the very way the wind moved through its decaying bones. What makes Hashima's rediscovery so compelling is how the wind revealed its hidden logic. As gusts funneled through narrow alleys between apartment blocks, they scoured the walls in distinct patterns, exposing painted numbers and symbols that turned out to be a coded map of the underground mine. The stronger the wind, the more it uncovered not just where miners worked, but how they lived. Fierce updrafts around the island's seawalls stripped away concrete veneer to reveal tiered laundry balconies, their metal poles still strung with fossilized clotheslines. Salt-laden breezes gnawed at the plaster of a schoolhouse, exposing chalkboards where lessons on coal safety lingered beneath the dust. Even the graffiti changed with the wind's direction. Patriotic slogans near the company offices, childish doodles by the dormitories, a heartbreaking tally of days until home leave scratched into a stairwell's steel railing. The island's design was a brutal kind of genius. Every inch of Hashima served the coal industry, and the wind's erosion patterns proved it. Apartment blocks were built at angles to deflect typhoon gusts while funneling ocean breezes into the mines for ventilation. Workers' housing clustered near the pithead, its walls thickened against noise and coal dust, while managers' quarters perched higher up, catching what little clean air the island offered. The wind's relentless work even exposed hidden passages tunnels connecting the bathhouse to the barracks, proof that miners followed strict hygiene rituals to prevent explosions. This wasn't just a town, it was a machine for extracting fuel, its every cog placed with purpose. But the real revelation came when researchers matched the wind's discoveries to survivor accounts. One corridor, scoured clean by a recurring draft, showed grooves worn into the floor, the exact path described by elderly miners who recalled running this gauntlet to reach the showers after shifts. Another gust exposed wall bore faint outlines of missing shelves, corroborating stories of families storing food in shifts due to rodent infestations. The wind didn't just uncover structures, it validated memories, giving voice to those who'd lived in this vertical city at sea. Perhaps most haunting is what the wind preserved of Hashima's final days. In the company canteen, a calendar still hung on a rusted nail, its page frozen at April 1974. Nearby, the outline of a paymaster's booth stood stark against a bleached wall, its barred window a reminder that wages came in scrip, not yen, trapping workers in a company-run economy. And in the eeriest find of all, the wind's patterning revealed a cluster of tiny shoes cemented to a rooftop playground, their rubber soles melted into the asphalt by decades of sun. These weren't artifacts, they were echoes, proof that 5,000 people once called this concrete hive home, their lives dictated by the coal dust on the wind and the tides that carried it away. Now, as Hashima's ruins draw curious visitors, the wind continues its archival work. Each storm peels back another layer, exposing fresh fragments of a community that thrived, suffered, and vanished within these seawalls. The lesson isn't just in what was left behind, but in how the island's very design, every wind-buffered corner and ventilation shaft speaks of a world where human lives were both the engine and the fuel of progress. The concrete may crumble, but the wind remembers. In the rolling grasslands of South Africa's Mpumalanga province, the wind has been quietly rearranging the puzzle pieces of human history. For generations, local farmers referred to a peculiar arrangement of standing stones as Adam's calendar, assuming it was just another curious rock formation. But when researchers began studying how the region's relentless winds had eroded the soil around these stones, an astonishing pattern emerged. The stones weren't random. They formed precise geometric alignments, and what's more, they weren't alone. Dozens of similar circles lay hidden beneath the veld, their outlines revealed only when the wind stripped away layers of topsoil like an archaeologist's careful brush. These aren't just haphazard piles of rock. Each circle is meticulously positioned, with key stones aligning to celestial events like solstices and equinoxes. The wind's erosion patterns exposed something even more remarkable. The stones themselves are often shaped, their edges deliberately flattened or angled to cast precise shadows at certain times of year. One particular formation near the town of Pueblon shows stones arranged in a perfect ellipse, their alignment matching the rise of Orion's belt during the winter solstice 10,000 years ago. The wind didn't just uncover these structures, it highlighted their purpose, revealing them as a sprawling astronomical observatory carved into the Earth itself. What makes these circles so compelling is how they challenge conventional timelines. Mainstream archaeology long held that complex astronomical knowledge emerged with agricultural societies, yet these wind-exposed sites predate farming in southern Africa by millennia. The precision is staggering. At one recently uncovered circle, researchers found a central monolith with a hole bored through its center, a natural telescope that frames the star Sirius on the horizon at dawn during the rainy season. Nearby, wind-scoured grooves in the bedrock trace the movement of the Southern Cross across centuries, a celestial calendar etched in stone. But the real revelation came when researchers mapped the circle's distribution. The wind's erosion showed they weren't isolated landmarks, but nodes in a vast network. Certain circles align in straight lines stretching for miles, their positions mirroring constellations visible only at specific elevations. Others cluster around natural springs, suggesting they served as both observatories and waypoints for ancient travelers, the most startling discovery. Several circles contain acoustic chambers, hollow spaces beneath capstones where the wind creates eerie harmonic hums when blowing from certain directions. These weren't just tools for tracking stars, they were instruments for summoning the very forces that would one day reveal them. Now, as climate change alters wind patterns across the Verde, new circles emerge each year. Some show signs of sophisticated engineering, with stones balanced on shims to allow micro-adjustments for celestial drift. Others bear carvings that match rock art found hundreds of miles away, proof of a shared knowledge system spanning the subcontinent. The wind's persistence has given us more than just ruins. It's offered a glimpse into a world where the sky wasn't just watched, but woven into the fabric of daily life. And as each gust uncovers another stone, another alignment, we're left to wonder, how many more secrets does this ancient land hold, waiting for the right breeze to set them free? For centuries, the fishermen of India's Coromandel coast told stories of a submerged city lurking beneath the waves, tales of towering stone gods glimpsed through storm-tossed waters, of bells ringing from drowned temples when the monsoon winds blew just right. These weren't just folk tales, they were memories passed down through generations, waiting for the ocean to yield its proof. Then, in 2004, the Indian Ocean's winds orchestrated a revelation. A tsunami's retreating waves scoured the seabed near Mahabalipuram, pulling back layers of sand to expose the truth. A sprawling harbor complex, its stone piers and temple spires preserved for 1,200 years beneath the shifting sands. The scale of the discovery stunned archaeologists. This wasn't just a few scattered ruins, it was a fully engineered port city. Its breakwaters and canals designed to harness the very winds and currents that eventually buried it. The key lay in the way the structures were positioned. Temples emerged facing specific angles, their foundations grooved to dissipate wave energy, while submerged roads followed the path of ancient trade winds, leading divers to a network of warehouses still stacked with amphorae from Persia and China. The wind and waves hadn't destroyed Mahabalipuram, they'd conspired to protect it, sealing the site in a natural time capsule. Local legends spoke of 7 pagodas, 6 swallowed by the sea as punishment for the city's pride. The ocean's sudden retreat revealed 5 temples almost instantly, their towering gopurums encrusted with barnacles but otherwise intact, their carvings of dancing Shiva and coiled serpents still crisp under the saltwater's patina. Even more astonishing was what lay between them, a perfectly preserved dockyard, its stone bolliers still bearing rope marks from the ships that once tied there. The wind's role in this preservation was poetic. Seasonal currents had piled sand against the structures in precise layers, creating a barrier that shielded delicate carvings from erosion while allowing just enough water movement to prevent silt from smothering them entirely. But the real revelation wasn't just the architecture, it was the trade. Mahabalipuram's harbor lay at the heart of a maritime silk route, and the wind's excavation proved it. Divers recovered pepper from Kerala, teak logs from Burma, even Roman coins mixed with Chinese porcelain, all clustered along what must have been a bustling waterfront. The city's layout told the story of its downfall too. Temples near the shore showed damage from repeated storm surges, their foundations undermined by centuries of rising seas. Further inland, wind-smoothed stones revealed where later builders had attempted to reinforce the coastline, stacking boulders in vain against the ocean's advance. Perhaps most haunting are the smaller finds the wind and waves' intimate touches. In one temple courtyard, sand erosion exposed a stone game board, its pieces still set mid-play as if waiting for owners who never returned. Nearby, a diver's light caught the glint of a gold earring wedged between stones, likely lost in a market's panic as the waters rose. These aren't just artifacts, they're frozen moments, proof that Mahabalipuram's end came not in a single cataclysm, but as a slow retreat before the sea's inexorable march. Now, as climate change accelerates coastal erosion, the wind is uncovering more of the city each year. With every storm, new structures emerge, a granary here, a watchtower there, each one confirming what the fishermen always knew: the past isn't lost. It's just waiting for the right combination of tide and wind to breathe it back to life. And as archaeologists piece together Mahabalipuram's final days, they're left with a humbling truth. The same forces that drowned this city may one day do the same to ours, leaving only stories, and perhaps, if we're lucky, stones patient enough to wait for their telling. Beneath the bustling streets of modern Mexico City, the wind carries echoes of an agricultural marvel that once turned swamp into sustenance. When particularly strong gusts sweep across the drained lakebed of Lake Texcoco, they peel back layers of urban sediment to reveal a hidden gridwork of narrow canals and rectangular plots, the ghostly outlines of ancient Chinampas, the Aztec Empire's ingenious floating gardens. These weren't just simple plots of land, they were feats of hydrological engineering so productive they fed a metropolis larger than any European city of their time, all without plows or beasts of burden. The secret lay in how the Chinampas harnessed the wind itself. By studying erosion patterns in the exposed soil, researchers realized these garden beds were meticulously aligned to catch seasonal breezes. Narrow canals between each plot acted as natural wind tunnels, circulating air to prevent pest infestations while distributing nutrient-rich lake sediment across the fields. The wind's persistent scouring has revealed even more astonishing details, traces of willow roots still clinging to the edges of plots, proving how the Aztecs stabilized these artificial islands with living fences. In some areas, the patterns show where farmers planted specific crops based on wind exposure: corn in wind-protected zones, delicate herbs where breezes could deter mold without damaging leaves. What makes this discovery so groundbreaking is how it rewrites our understanding of urban sustainability. Modern core samples matched with wind-driven sediment layers show these gardens weren't just productive, they were regenerative. The Aztecs designed them to thrive on waste, recycling human fertilizer and composting aquatic plants into the soil. The wind's erosion patterns even exposed stratified layers of oyster shells and pottery shards mixed into the Chinampa soil, evidence of a circular economy where refuse became fertilizer. At their peak, these wind-aligned plots yielded up to 7 harvests a year, supporting a population density that wouldn't be matched until the Industrial Revolution. The real revelation came when researchers mapped the wind-exposed remnants against historical records. Spanish conquistadors wrote of markets overflowing with produce, but scholars long dismissed these accounts as exaggeration. Now, the physical evidence proves otherwise. Wind-scoured patches near the Zocalo, the city's main square, revealed Chinampa foundations beneath colonial buildings, confirming these gardens stretched right into the heart of Tenochtitlan. The layout tells a story of precision planning. Plots widened where winds were gentler, narrowed where gusts strengthened, all following a geometric master plan that balanced yield with microclimate control. Perhaps most impressive is how the wind preserves the Chinampa's legacy in unexpected ways. Pollen grains carried from surviving wetland fragments have settled in precise patterns across the excavation sites, revealing which crops grew where amaranth pollen clusters near former homesteads, bean vines along canal edges. Even today's urban winds follow the original canal network, their paths detectable through temperature variations captured by satellite imaging. It's as if the city remembers its roots, the air itself tracing the contours of a lost world where civilization flourished not by conquering nature, but by dancing with it. Now, as Mexico City sinks under the weight of its modern sprawl, these wind-unearthed fragments offer more than just history, they provide solutions. Urban farmers have begun reviving Chinampa techniques along the few remaining canals, using the same wind patterns to naturally aerate soils and deter pests. The past isn't just speaking here, it's teaching, showing how a society once fed itself through harmony with the elements. And with every gust that scours away another layer of concrete, the message grows clearer. Sometimes progress doesn't mean inventing something new, but remembering what we've forgotten. The turquoise waters of the Bahamas hide more than just coral reefs and sunken treasure. They conceal entire chapters of pirate history, written not in ink, but in the relentless push and pull of ocean currents. Near Nassau, where the Atlantic's trade winds collide with the Caribbean's gentler breezes, lies a ship graveyard unlike any other. Here, the very forces that once carried infamous pirates to notoriety also conspired to preserve their legacy. Take Blackbeard's anchor, discovered not by some elaborate treasure map, but by oceanographers tracking sediment patterns left by centuries of swirling gusts. The anchor rested where historical wind models predicted it would be wedged in a sandy trough formed by the collision of two opposing currents, a natural trap for vessels caught in the wrong storm. This stretch of coast wasn't just dangerous by accident. Pirates like Blackbeard and Charles Vane deliberately sought out these turbulent zones, using their knowledge of wind and wave behavior to create nautical deadfalls. They'd lure merchant ships into areas where the wind dropped suddenly near shore, leaving sails limp while hidden reefs did the rest. The wrecks became more than just hazards, they were strategic barriers, forming a watery fortress around pirate havens. Modern LiDAR scans reveal how these sunken ships created artificial breakwaters, their hulls disrupting currents to form calm lagoons where pirate fleets could regroup. The same storms that sank these vessels also sculpted the seafloor into perfect hideouts, with sandbars piling up against wreckage to create uncharted shallows only locals could navigate. The wind's role in this story goes beyond navigation. By analyzing sediment cores near Nassau, researchers found layers of charred wood and cannonball fragments concentrated in bands that matched historical hurricane records. These weren't random acts of nature, they were environmental fingerprints of the infamous Pirates Republic era. One particular storm layer, dated to 1718, contained Spanish silver coins fused together by heat, likely from a ship's burning magazine. The distribution of these finds followed wind-driven erosion patterns, clustering where northeasterlies had scoured the seabed. Even the pirates' discarded trash became clues, piles of turtle bones and broken rum bottles found in underwater caves aligned with wind tunnels that would have carried cooking smoke away from hidden campsites. What makes these discoveries revolutionary is how they merge legend with hard science. Blackbeard's supposed haunted anchor, long dismissed as tavern folklore, was found exactly where 18th century sailors claimed it sank, not because their stories were accurate, but because their descriptions of the wind that night matched modern storm models. The anchor's position, wedged between two coral heads, proved the tale's key detail, that his ship Queen Anne's Revenge had been pinned by a sudden wind shift. Maritime archaeologists later found the rest of the wreck less than a mile away, its cannon still trained seaward as if frozen mid-battle. But the real treasure isn't gold or silver, it's the way these sites reveal pirate society. Wind patterns around Nassau's ship graveyards show deliberate planning. Smaller wrecks form a perimeter in shallower waters, their positions creating wave shadows that protected larger ships further inland. The orientation of careened hulls vessels tipped sideways for repairs follows seasonal wind directions, proving pirates waited for optimal conditions to maintain their fleets. Even the infamous Pirates Code finds physical proof. A waterlogged ledger found in a submerged cave near Exuma, its pages preserved by layers of wind-blown sand, details shared loot divided precisely by role and risk. As climate change alters Caribbean wind patterns, new chapters of this story emerge. Stronger hurricanes are exposing wrecks buried for centuries, while shifting currents unveil artifacts once thought lost. Recently, a school of stingrays dislodged a previously hidden cache of pirate pistols near Andros Island, their position marked by a peculiar spiral of sand, a signature left by an eddy that forms when easterlies collide with the Gulf Stream. It's a reminder that the ocean hasn't finished telling this tale. Every gust that ruffles the Bahamas waters isn't just moving air, it's turning the pages of a history written in ship timbers, scattered coins, and the stubborn remnants of men who lived by the wind's whim. Off the rugged Welsh coastline, where Atlantic gales carve cliffs into jagged silhouettes, an eerie landscape emerges at low tide, gnarled oak stumps rising from the sand like skeletal fingers. These aren't just driftwood remnants, they're the last sentinels of a vast forest that thrived here 5,000 years ago when sea levels were lower, and this was fertile inland terrain. The same winds that once rustled through their canopies now act as nature's archaeologists, peeling back layers of peat and sediment to reveal a snapshot of Neolithic life frozen in time. What makes these submerged forests so extraordinary is how vividly they capture a moment of environmental transformation. The exposed stumps aren't scattered randomly, they stand in eerie rows, their roots still gripping the ancient soil with the stubbornness of trees that didn't drown suddenly, but fought a slow retreat against rising waters. Between them, the wind has uncovered even more haunting traces. Human footprints pressed into what was once soft riverbank clay, now hardened by time. Some stride purposefully toward higher ground, others cluster around what appears to be a gathering place, their edges blurred by the lapping of waves that would eventually swallow the land whole. The real revelation came when storms in 2014 scoured away a particularly thick layer of peat near Borth, exposing not just stumps but tools. A stone axe lay beside a half-felled trunk, its polished edge still sharp enough to slice wood. Nearby, woven baskets preserved by the peat's acidity held acorns and hazelnuts, their contents perfectly intact. This wasn't a forest abandoned in panic. It was a landscape in active use, where Neolithic families harvested materials even as the sea crept closer. The wind's patient work revealed subtle details modern archaeology might have missed. Grooves on certain stumps showed where bark had been carefully stripped for roofing or canoe making, while notches on others suggested deliberate shaping for construction. But the most poignant discovery was underfoot. As the wind shifted dunes near Unearthing, it exposed a trail of footprints, some adult, some child-sized, all heading inland. Beside them, pressed into the same clay layer, were hoof prints of aurochs, the massive wild cattle that once roamed Europe. The alignment was unmistakable. Humans and animals alike were migrating away from the encroaching saltwater, their paths crossing in what might have been a final hunt before the forest became a memory. What's fascinating is how the wind's erosion patterns help reconstruct the timeline. Peat forms in still, waterlogged environments, so layers where it's thickest represent periods of rapid flooding. By studying how deep the footprints sink into these layers, researchers determined the forest's demise wasn't a single catastrophic event, but a series of inundations separated by generations. In some places, young oaks sprouted atop stumps of their drowned ancestors, proof that people kept returning to harvest new growth between floods. The wind's selective unveiling even hints at their adaptation strategies. Clusters of fish bones and shellfish middens appear higher up the shore, showing how diets shifted from forest foraging to coastal gathering as the waters rose. Now, when winter storms batter this coastline, the wind continues its archival work. Each gale exposes fresh traces, a fire pit here, a carved wooden stake there, all adding brushstrokes to a portrait of resilience. These forests weren't just lost, they were transformed, their demise birthing new ecosystems and ways of life. Standing on the beach today, watching the tide swallow the stumps once more, you're not just looking at relics. You're witnessing a dialogue between land and sea, written in peat and etched by the wind, a reminder that every shoreline holds stories if we know how to listen. Just a stone's throw from Jordan's iconic Petra, where tourists flock to marvel at the rose-red city's towering facades, lies its quieter sibling, Little Petra. For years, this smaller site was dismissed as a mere satellite settlement, a way station for camel caravans passing through the desert, but the wind had other ideas. Relentless gusts carving through the sandstone cliffs began revealing something extraordinary, not just a handful of tombs and cisterns, but an entire shadow city, its grandeur etched into the very way the wind had shaped the rock over centuries. The first clue came when researchers noticed peculiar patterns in the erosion along Sik al-Barid, Little Petra's narrow canyon entrance. While most wind-worn surfaces showed random pitting, certain sections had unnaturally smooth channels running parallel to the ground, the telltale marks of ancient water systems. As archaeologists followed these grooves, they uncovered a network of reservoirs and aqueducts far more sophisticated than anything previously documented. But the real shock came when the wind exposed something hidden behind a facade of crumbling rock. A tomb entrance no one knew existed, its lintel carved with Nabatean symbols so crisp they looked freshly chiseled. Inside, the tomb's preservation was breathtaking. The same winds that had scoured the exterior had sealed the chamber in a protective bubble of dry air, leaving vibrant frescoes untouched by time. One wall depicted a banquet scene so detailed, researchers could identify the species of grapes in painted fruit bowls. Another showed a procession of merchants leading camels laden with frankincense, their route mirroring trade paths still visible in the canyon floor's wind-smoothed grooves. This wasn't just a burial site, it was a time capsule of Nabatean daily life, hidden in plain sight. What makes Little Petra's rediscovery so revolutionary is how it rewrites the relationship between the two cities. The wind's erosion patterns revealed that the sites weren't just connected, they were complementary halves of a single urban plan. Where Petra's grand monuments faced outward to impress visitors, Little Petra's newly exposed structures turned inward, designed for practicality. A wind-carved amphitheater nestled in a natural hollow hosted acoustic experiments when researchers sang inside. The canyon's curves amplified sound precisely toward Petra's main road, suggesting signal points for caravan traffic. Hidden granaries, their ventilation shafts aligned to desert breezes, still held traces of wheat and barley, their capacity large enough to feed thousands. The wind's most poignant revelation, though, came from an overlooked cliff face near the site's edge. As a particularly fierce storm stripped away layers of dust, it exposed hundreds of tiny handprints pressed into the soft stone, some adult, some child-sized, all clustered around what turned out to be a now dry spring. These weren't ritual markings, but the imprints of daily life, Nabatean families gathering water, their touches preserved like signatures in the rock. Nearby, the wind uncovered a series of shallow depressions in the canyon floor, footrests carved for weavers who once worked here, their looms angled to catch the afternoon light while sheltered from the wind's harshest gusts. Today, as archaeologists piece together Little Petra's full story, the wind continues its archival work. Each season reveals new details: a merchant's ledger scratched into a cave wall, a hidden staircase leading to a rooftop observatory, even a nursery where young saplings were once nurtured in wind-protected stone troughs before being transplanted into the desert. These discoveries don't diminish Petra's glory, they enrich it, showing that behind every monumental city lies a living, breathing community whose ingenuity was written not just in stone, but in the very air that shaped it. And sometimes all it takes to hear their story is listening to where the wind leads. From deserts to seabeds, the wind has always been more than just a force of nature. It's a meticulous archivist, preserving the stories of civilizations long gone in the very currents that once shaped their daily lives. These 30 reconstructed settlements stand as testament to an astonishing truth. The air around us carries echoes of the past, if only we know how to listen. The same gusts that erode mountains and reshape coastlines also hold the keys to unlocking history, revealing lost cities not through deliberate excavation, but through the patient, unrelenting work of time and weather. Consider the irony: what we often dismiss as mere wind, an invisible and fleeting presence, has proven to be one of history's most faithful record keepers. It's preserved temples in the Sahara by sealing them in dunes, etched the outlines of Viking homes into Greenland's ice, and even whispered the coordinates of drowned empires like Heracleion through the movement of underwater sands. These discoveries don't just rewrite chapters of history, they redefine how we explore them. Archaeology is no longer confined to trowels and brushes. It's in the algorithms that decode wind patterns, the satellite images that track erosion, and the climatology models that reconstruct ancient storms. What's thrilling is how much remains undiscovered. If wind alone could lead us to 30 forgotten settlements, imagine what else might lie hidden, waiting for the right storm, the right gust, the right moment to reveal itself. Perhaps there's a lost Silk Road caravanserai beneath the Taklamakan's shifting sands, its walls still standing where the wind diverted dunes around them. Maybe a coastal settlement in Indonesia, swallowed by rising seas, is preserved in the way currents swirl around its submerged foundations. The potential is limitless, and the tools to uncover these secrets are evolving faster than ever. Drones, AI-powered wind mapping, even space-based sensors, all are turning the atmosphere itself into a living archive. But beyond the technology, there's something deeply human in this pursuit. These discoveries reconnect us with people who, centuries or millennia ago, also felt the wind on their faces, who built their homes to harness its power, who traded goods carried on its back, who etched their stories into landscapes the wind would one day uncover. Whether it's the child's footprint in Warham Percy's clay or the last meal left in a Greenlandic Viking longhouse, these moments bridge time, reminding us that history isn't just about grand events, but about lives lived in rhythm with the world around them. So as you step outside today, take a breath. The air you're inhaling has traveled through epochs, passing over ruins and relics we've yet to discover. The next great find might already be stirring in a desert storm or a coastal gale, its secrets poised to surface, and when they do, we'll be there following the wind, one gust at a time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to join us on the journey. After all, the past isn't done speaking, it's just waiting for the